The vast darkness of space stretched endlessly around the massive generation ship, its metallic hull gleaming with a subtle blue-gray shimmer. Inside, J. Park stood near the observation deck, his fingers tracing the holographic family records that had survived generations of exile. Humanity's story was not one of immediate triumph, but of survival. Decades ago, when the alien Kraxan Imperium first attacked Earth, no one could have predicted the resilience of the human species. The invasion had been swift and devastating. Massive ships descended from the sky, obliterating major cities, turning continents into smoking ruins. Billions died in the first wave, and those who survived were scattered like dust in the cosmic wind. Jay's grandparents were among the last batch of refugees who managed to escape. They spoke of Earth not as a memory, but as a promise. Their generation had meticulously planned the exodus, understanding that survival meant more than just escape, it meant preparation. The generation ships were more than just vessels. They were living ecosystems, carefully designed to sustain human life for potentially centuries. Hydroponics gardens lined interior corridors, producing food. Advanced recycling systems transformed waste into resources. Every inch of space was calculated, every system redundant. Young engineers like Jay spent years studying the archives. Old technological blueprints, scientific journals, and historical records became their sacred texts. They learned about the world their ancestors had lost and the technologies they would need to reclaim it. Life aboard the ship was structured but not oppressive. Children were educated in multiple disciplines. Physical training was mandatory. Every individual was expected to contribute, to learn, to adapt. The dream of returning to Earth was not just a fantasy, it was a collective mission. Genetic diversity was carefully maintained. Reproduction was planned, with complex algorithms ensuring healthy populations. Medical technologies had advanced to the point where genetic disorders could be eliminated, and human potential could be carefully nurtured. Jay discovered something extraordinary in the deep archives, forgotten research about quantum adaptive technologies. These weren't just theoretical documents. They were practical blueprints for survival, for transformation. His research suggested that humans could develop technologies far beyond what the Kraxan could comprehend. The ship's council was initially skeptical. Centuries of exile had made them cautious. But Jay's passionate presentations and solid research gradually won them over. His proposal was simple: develop technologies that could infiltrate, adapt, and ultimately defeat the alien systems that had conquered their home. Communication between the scattered human ships was rare but crucial. Encrypted quantum signals would occasionally pass between vessels, sharing critical information, maintaining hope. Each transmission was a lifeline, a reminder that humanity was not alone. Outside the ship's protective shields, space remained both beautiful and terrifying. Asteroid fields, radiation storms, and unknown cosmic phenomena constantly tested their survival mechanisms. But humans had become masters of adaptation. What would have killed previous generations became mere challenges to overcome. Jay often watched the star maps, tracking potential routes back to Earth. The journey was not just about physical distance but about preparing a strategy of return. Every simulation, every technological breakthrough brought them one step closer to reclaiming their lost world. The older generations spoke of Earth with reverence: blue oceans, green forests, sprawling cities. To Jay and his contemporaries, these were more like legends than memories. Their world was this ship, these corridors, these carefully maintained systems that kept them alive. But deep down, a fire burned. A determination that would not be extinguished. Humanity would return. Not as refugees, not as survivors, but as conquerors of their own destiny. As Jay looked out into the infinite darkness, he knew their time was coming. The Kraxan might have taken their planet, but they could never take their spirit. Humanity was patient. Humanity was adaptable. And humanity was preparing for its ultimate revenge. The generation ship continued its silent journey through the cosmos, carrying within its metal walls the hopes, dreams, and inevitable future of a species that refused to be forgotten. The scout ship moved silently through the star system, its quantum adaptive camouflage rendering it invisible to conventional detection systems. Hannah Kim sat at the primary observation station, her hands steady on the control interface, her eyes scanning the holographic displays that mapped their approach to Earth. Years of preparation had led to this moment. Generations of humans had trained for this single mission: reconnaissance, assessment, and the first step toward reclaiming their lost home. The planet that appeared on the screens was both familiar and alien. Massive industrial complexes covered what were once lush continents, metallic structures stretching across landscapes that had once been forests and cities. The Kraxan had transformed Earth into an industrial mining colony, stripping away its natural beauty with ruthless efficiency. Atmospheric sensors showed devastating changes: toxic levels of industrial waste, dramatically altered climate patterns, and near-total ecological collapse. What had once been a vibrant blue and green planet now looked like a gray and brown industrial wasteland. Hannah's team consisted of 6 carefully selected specialists. Each had been trained in multiple disciplines: planetary reconnaissance, advanced stealth technology, and emergency adaptation protocols. Their mission was simple but incredibly complex: gather intelligence without being detected. Specialized drone probes began their silent descent. These were not ordinary machines but advanced biomechanical units that could adapt to multiple environments. They slipped through the planet's defensive networks like ghosts, collecting data from multiple regions simultaneously. The first shocking discovery came from the southern hemisphere. Small human settlements existed, not as free populations, but as controlled labor groups working in Kraxan mining operations. These were descendants of those who couldn't escape during the original invasion. They had survived, but at a terrible cost. Communication intercepts revealed the Kraxans' complete confidence. They believed humanity had been totally eliminated. Their reports showed no expectation of any human resistance or return. This overconfidence would become their greatest weakness. Detailed scans revealed something unexpected. Pockets of resistance existed in hidden underground networks. Small groups of humans had maintained secret communication systems, preserving knowledge and waiting for a moment of potential liberation. These were not just survivors, but potential allies. Hannah's most critical task was mapping the planetary defense systems. Kraxan technology was advanced but followed predictable patterns. Their defensive networks had blind spots, mathematical vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Each scan, each intercepted signal provided crucial intelligence for a future liberation strategy. The psychological impact of seeing Earth in this condition was profound. For generations, humans had carried memories and holographic records of their beautiful home planet. Now, seeing it transformed into an industrial nightmare created a mixture of anger, grief, and determination. Underground resource databases showed something interesting. Despite massive industrial exploitation, the planet retained remarkable resilience. Natural regeneration systems had been slowly working, even under extreme conditions. Areas untouched by direct mining showed signs of potential ecological recovery. As the reconnaissance mission continued, Hannah realized this was more than a scouting expedition. This was the first step in humanity's ultimate return. Every piece of data, every discovered vulnerability would be crucial in their future strategy. The scout ship's systems began compiling a comprehensive report. Planetary defense configurations, industrial complex locations, human labor settlement coordinates, and potential infiltration points were meticulously recorded. This information would be transmitted back to the human fleet, encoded in quantum encrypted signals that would be undetectable to Kraxan systems. Hannah looked at her team. They were not just researchers or soldiers. They were the first wave of humanity's comeback. Their mission represented hope, a promise that their species would not be forgotten, would not be erased. As the scout ship prepared to extract, leaving no trace of its presence, Hannah knew one thing with absolute certainty: humanity was coming home. And nothing would stop their return. The planet below continued its industrial rhythm, completely unaware of the storm that was slowly, methodically gathering strength among the stars. The first strike was not a moment of loud explosion or dramatic combat, but a silent, calculated infiltration that would change everything. Wu Choi stood on the bridge of the lead assault ship, his fingers dancing across quantum interface panels that seemed to breathe with technological life. Humanity's strategy was elegant in its complexity. They would not announce their arrival with traditional weapons, but with digital ghosts that would unravel the Kraxen's entire technological infrastructure from within. Specialized nano-infiltration units, smaller than a human cell, had been strategically deployed months earlier through microscopic entry points in the planet's communication networks. These nano-units were more than machines. They were living algorithms, adaptive systems that could reshape themselves, learn, and spread like an intelligent virus through alien technological systems. Each unit carried complex instructions: disable, disrupt, and prepare the ground for human return. The first signs of success came quietly. Communication networks between Kraxen industrial zones began to falter. Automated defense systems started showing random, unpredictable behaviors. Entire regions of planetary control began to go dark, one sector at a time. Wu watched the holographic displays with calculated patience. Years of training had prepared him for this moment. Special operations teams were positioned in strategic locations, underground human settlements, abandoned mining facilities, and areas with minimal Kraxen surveillance. When the attack began, it looked nothing like traditional warfare. There were no massive explosions, no obvious signs of conflict. Instead, entire Kraxen communication grids simply collapsed. Defense systems became confused, turning against themselves. Automated machinery started operating with seemingly random instructions. Underground human settlements, which had survived in secret for generations, received carefully encrypted signals. These were not just communication messages but activation codes. Generations of hidden resistance groups had been waiting, preparing, training for this exact moment. Small teams of human operatives began emerging from hidden locations. They were not conventional soldiers but highly trained specialists, engineers, technologists, and adaptation experts who understood both human and Kraxen technologies. Their mission was precise: disable critical infrastructure without massive destruction. The Kraxen's first response was confusion. Their advanced technological systems, which had seemed invincible, were failing in ways they could not comprehend. Communication between their industrial zones became increasingly fragmented. Defensive protocols began to contradict each other. Wu's team targeted specific strategic points. Communication relay stations, central processing centers, planetary defense coordinates. Each was systematically neutralized through a combination of digital infiltration and precision physical intervention. They moved like shadows, leaving no trace of their presence. What made this attack unique was its surgical precision. Humans were not seeking total destruction but strategic disruption. They wanted to create chaos in the Kraxen systems, to demonstrate their technological superiority, and to prepare the ground for a larger liberation effort. Rescue teams began extracting long-hidden human populations from controlled labor zones. These were not just rescue missions but reunification operations. Generations of separated human groups were finally coming together, their collective knowledge and resilience becoming a powerful weapon. The psychological impact was as significant as the technological one. The Kraxen, who had believed humanity was extinct, were suddenly confronted with a sophisticated, unexpected resistance. Their confidence began to crack, replaced by a growing sense of vulnerability. By the mission's second day, nearly 60% of the Kraxen's planetary control systems had been compromised. What seemed like random technological failures were actually a carefully orchestrated digital assault that was systematically dismantling their entire infrastructure. Wu understood this was just the beginning. The first strike was not about total conquest but about creating the conditions for humanity's return. Every disabled system, every rescued human, every compromised network was a step toward reclaiming their home. As planetary darkness began to fall, the first human flags, carefully preserved through generations of exile, were prepared for deployment. Earth was about to remember the taste of human determination. The revolution had begun, not with a roar, but with a precise, calculated whisper of technological rebellion. Li stood at the edge of what was once a massive industrial complex, now a site of transformation. In her hands, she held a small device that looked like a cross between a scientific instrument and a living organism. The planetary restoration had begun, and it would be nothing short of miraculous. The first phase of restoration focused on ecological regeneration. Specially designed bionanites began their work, breaking down toxic industrial waste and transforming contaminated soil into fertile ground. These weren't just machines, but living technologies that could adapt, learn, and heal the planet's wounded surface. Massive atmospheric purification systems were deployed across continents. Floating platforms filled the sky, slowly filtering out decades of industrial pollution. Where once thick layers of toxic gases had choked the atmosphere, clean air began to emerge. The sky, which had been a permanent gray, started to show hints of blue. Water systems were the next critical target. Rivers and oceans that had been dead zones for generations began to show signs of life. Engineered microorganisms consumed industrial pollutants, while advanced filtration systems restored marine ecosystems. Coral reefs that had been thought extinct started to regenerate in carefully managed marine zones. The human teams worked with precision and passion. They were not just restoring a planet, but healing a collective wound that had existed for generations. Each team member carried the memories of their ancestors, the stories of the world they had lost and were now reclaiming. Abandoned industrial zones became sites of incredible transformation. Massive structures were carefully dismantled, their materials recycled into restoration infrastructure. Where giant mining complexes once stood, the first signs of forest regeneration began to appear. Genetically enhanced plant species, designed to rapidly clean and restore soil, began their work. Underground human populations, who had survived in hidden settlements, played a crucial role. Their generational knowledge of survival, combined with advanced restoration technologies, created a powerful force of planetary healing. They were not just witnesses to the restoration but active participants. Specialized drone networks continuously monitored the planetary recovery. These were not simple machines but intelligent systems that could adapt, learn, and make complex decisions about ecological restoration. They moved like a living network across the planet's surface, tracking every stage of recovery. Agricultural zones were recreated using advanced terraforming technologies. Crops that could survive in challenging conditions were developed, ensuring food security for the returning human populations. Vertical farming systems and advanced hydroponics transformed urban landscapes. The psychological impact of the restoration was profound. For the first time in generations, humans could see their planet healing. Children who had only known life in space or underground settlements were witnessing the resurrection of a world their ancestors had lost. Energy systems were completely redesigned. Instead of the destructive industrial technologies of the Kraxon, humans implemented clean, adaptive energy networks. Solar, wind, and advanced quantum energy systems began to replace the old infrastructure, creating a sustainable planetary ecosystem. Wildlife regeneration programs brought another layer of hope. Genetic repositories, carefully maintained during the human exile, allowed for the recreation of species thought to be extinct. The first signs of animal life began to appear in restored wilderness zones. Li watched as the first trees began to grow in an area that had been a toxic industrial wasteland just weeks earlier. Her team had developed plant species that could rapidly clean soil, absorb pollutants, and create conditions for broader ecological recovery. The restoration was more than a technological process. It was a healing of collective trauma. Each restored hectare of land was a victory against the destruction humanity had endured. The planet was not just being rebuilt, it was being reborn. By the restoration's 6th month, satellite images showed dramatic changes. Green zones expanded, atmospheric conditions improved, and the first natural rain in generations fell across recovered continents. The planet was remembering how to live. As sunset approached, looked across the landscape. Where there had been nothing but industrial waste, life was emerging. Humanity had not just returned, they had brought resurrection with them. Earth was coming back to life, one carefully restored moment at a time. Sung Park stood on the newly constructed Global Council platform, overlooking the rebuilt capital city. The world had changed dramatically, and humanity was no longer just a surviving species, they had become something more. The new global government was unlike anything in human history. It wasn't built on old national boundaries or previous political systems, but on a unified vision of survival and progress. Every human settlement, whether from the generation ships or the underground resistance, had representation. Technology and collective wisdom replaced traditional power structures. Technological integration became the cornerstone of human society. Children were educated not just in traditional subjects, but in adaptive thinking, ecological management, and interstellar communication. Schools were living learning environments where artificial intelligence and human creativity worked seamlessly together. Space exploration was no longer a distant dream but an immediate priority. The same technologies that had allowed humans to survive their long exile now powered a new generation of exploration vessels. Quantum communication systems allowed instant connection across vast cosmic distances, breaking down the isolation that had defined their previous existence. The first interstellar missions were already being planned. Specialized ships, designed with the collective knowledge gathered during generations of survival, were being constructed in orbital shipyards. These were not just vessels of exploration, but living ecosystems capable of sustaining human life for decades. Genetic technologies had advanced to levels that would have seemed impossible generations earlier. Diseases were becoming relics of the past. Human bodies could be enhanced, adapted to different environmental conditions, making space exploration more feasible than ever before. Planetary defense became a critical focus. The trauma of the original Kraxan invasion had taught humanity a crucial lesson: never be caught unprepared again. Advanced warning systems, adaptive defense technologies, and a unified planetary protection strategy were developed. The cultural renaissance was equally remarkable. Art, music, and creative expression flourished in ways never seen before. The shared experience of survival and return created a global culture that celebrated resilience, adaptation, and collective achievement. Economic systems were redesigned around sustainable development and collective progress. Resources were managed with unprecedented efficiency. The old concepts of individual wealth were replaced by a more holistic approach to human development. Sung Park's role was crucial. As a leader who had been part of the restoration efforts, he understood that rebuilding was more than just physical reconstruction. It was about healing collective trauma, creating a vision of hope, and preparing for a future that was limitless. The first Memorial Day was established not to commemorate loss, but to celebrate survival. Every year, humans would remember their journey, their resilience, and their incredible return. Children would learn the stories of their ancestors, not as tales of suffering, but as inspiration. Ecological management became a global priority. The technologies developed during planetary restoration were now being shared with scientific communities worldwide. Humans had learned that survival was about harmony, not domination. Communication with potential extraterrestrial civilizations became a structured, careful process. The experiences with the Kraxan had taught humanity to approach unknown species with caution, intelligence, and a commitment to peaceful interaction. The orbital cities began to expand. What started as necessary survival structures during the exile were now becoming vibrant, self-sustaining communities. They represented humanity's ability to create life in the most challenging environments. Advanced AI systems worked alongside human teams, not as replacements, but as collaborative partners. The integration of artificial and human intelligence created solutions to problems that would have seemed impossible generations earlier. As the sun set on the rebuilt Earth, Sung Park reflected on the journey. From near extinction to planetary restoration, from exile to a new beginning, humanity had not just survived, they had transformed. The stars no longer represented a threat or a place of exile. They were now a promise, an invitation to explore, to grow, to become something greater than anyone could have imagined. Humanity was reborn. And their story was just beginning.